All right, Rabosai. Good morning. Let's begin. All right, let's begin. So we left off last line of Pei Beis Amud Beis. So if you remember again, in the Gemara yesterday, the Gemara told the story about an Ubra, a pregnant woman who had smelled food on Yom Kippur, and they came before Rebbe, and they asked Rebbe what they should do, and Rebbe said to her, whisper that it's Yom Kippur. So the Gemara said that at that point in time the baby settled down, and Rebbe said essentially that that's a sign that this child is going to grow up to be a great tzaddik. And sure enough, it turned out to be that the baby was Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara tells another story. Hahu Ubra, last line, the Archa, who smelled food on Yom Kippur, they came before Rabbi Chanina. Amar Lahu, Rabbi Chanina said to them, L'cho shula, whisper in her ear that it's Yom Kippur, v'lo ichlasha. But interestingly enough, when they whispered in her ear, it did not cause the child to settle down. Rashi says, ichlasha, kibla es halechisha, shepasak uber, the child didn't settle down. Kari alei, to this Rabbi Yochanan said, top of Pei Gimel, Zoru Rishoim Merechem. Literally, the wicked become estranged already from the womb. So apparently Rabbi Chanina felt that the fact that the child did not settle down after being told that it was Yom Kippur was indicative of the fact that perhaps this child was not going to do good things in the future, and therefore he called about in this pasuk, the wicked become estranged from the womb. Rashi says, Na'asu zorim v'nisnachru la'avim shabashamayim. They became estranged already to HaKadosh Baruch Hu from the womb, and sure enough, the Gemara says, Nafek minei shabsi aser peri. Sure enough, who came? What this baby was actually Shabsai, the hoarder of produce. Now, what does it mean, Shabsai, the hoarder of produce? Look at Rashi for just a moment. Otsar Peri. Rashi says, now what did this man do? It's an interesting practice. He says, Lahafkia Sha'arim. He used to hoard produce in order to go ahead and drive up the price. And then, of course, once the price was artificially inflated, he was able to dump all of his produce on the market. Lahafkia Sha'arim V'tanya, Ein Otzim Peris Beretz Yisrael V'chol Dvarshu Chayi Nefesh Levish Mafkimas Sham Bosai. There's a halacha against hoarding. So halacha against hoarding in a way that artificially drives up prices, that makes things more difficult for the common man. So it turned out that this child that would not settle down, this fetus that would not settle down for Yom Kippur, ultimately became Shabsai, the Otzar Peri. Says the Gemara, Chola ma'achilin osal pi bikin. So if you remember again what the Mishnah said, if someone is ill, we feed them on Yom Kippur on the advice of experts. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yanai, Chola, another couple of very interesting cases. Rabbi Yanai said the following, Chola omer tzarich. Let's say again the chola, the person who's ill, says I need to eat. V'rofe omer eno tzarich. But the doctor, let's say we have a doctor there, and the doctor says, no, he's fine, he can make it through the fast without eating. What's the halacha? Shomin l'chola. We listen to the person. We listen to the ill person. Why? My taima. Leiv yodea maras nafsho. I will say a very profound statement. Literally, a soul, or I should say a heart, knows the bitterness of its soul. Also, which is another way of saying what? No one knows you like you. So the doctor could be the most wonderful physician. At the end of the day, he doesn't know the patient like the patient knows the patient. So the Gemara says, Pshita, that's obvious. So meaning, what's the chiddush over here? Mauditim, what would I have thought? Rofe kim leitvei. I might have thought that the doctor knows more. So even though the patient says that Lamaisa, he knows that he needs to eat, but this guy went to school, spent all this money, all this training, he knows what he's talking about. Kamashwan, yeah, we're not even disputing that he knows what he's talking about. Doctor knows what he's talking about, but at the end of the day, no one knows the patient like the patient. Rofe omer tzarich, v'chola omer ein lo tzarich. We'll say, you should know this is the case that comes up more often on Yom Kippur. So what happens? The doctor says, you need to eat, and the patient says, no, I don't. I'm fine, I can make it. So the halacha is, Shobin l'rofe. We listen to the doctor. My time. Why is that? So it's interesting over here, as we just said, Lev yodea maras nafsho. We just said before that a person knows themselves best. How can we listen to the doctor over here? My time. Tunva hu dinokitle. We're concerned that a tunva, look at Rashi, tunva shtus. We're concerned that he's like a little delirious. The patient maybe is not of sound mind. therefore he's not making good decisions. Rabbi say, which you see what halacha is essentially doing is trying to go ahead and protect the interests of the individual. So if the individual says he needs to eat and the doctor says he doesn't need to eat, then Lamaisa we're going to let him eat. If the patient says I don't need to eat, the doctor says yes you do. Again, we're looking out anytime that there's a suffix, anytime there's a doubt, we're going to go with the interests of the individual. So we listen to the doctor. If the doctor says he needs to eat, even if the patient says he doesn't. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah. So remember, what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said that if you have a person who's ill, you could feed him on the advice of bikin. Bikin also means experts, which in this context means doctors. So you could feed him on the advice of doctors. Api, now the Gemara understands what the Mishnah seems to be saying is api bikin in, api atzmolo. Now the inference from that is the only way to ultimately feed the patient is because you have expert testimony that says that he needs to eat, but his own statement that he needs to eat seemingly is not enough to allow him to eat on Yom Kippur, to which the Gemara says, api bikin in, api atzmolo, to which the Gemara says, api bikin in, api baki echad lo. Oh no, what does the Mishnah come to teach us? The Mishnah is coming to teach us that in order for the patient to eat, there has to be two doctors, but one doctor is not enough. So the Gemara says, Hachamay askinon. What case are you talking about over here? Da'amar lo tzrichna. The case over here is where the patient says, the individual says, I don't need to eat. I don't need to eat. And therefore, what does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says in order to force him to eat on Yom Kippur, what do you need? You need a testimony of two doctors, meaning that if it's just one doctor, then essentially what you have is you have one doctor against one patient, 1 versus 1. That's not compelling enough to order him to eat on Yom Kippur. But if you have two doctors that say he needs to eat, then Lamaisa again, that's compelling enough to force him. Look at Rashi. Hachab mayaskinon da'amra chola lo tzarich va'ashmo'inan masisin d'shomen l'rofin. So the case again is where the patient says, I don't need to eat. The doctors say he doesn't need to eat. If it's one doctor, it's 1 against 1. But if it's two doctors, it's 2 against 1. And we would compel him to eat. To which the Gemara says, v'leis fulei. Api baki. So I don't understand. But why do we need two? Why, look at Rashi. Api baki. Now we just said above, that Lamaisa, if the doctor says the patient needs to eat and the patient says he doesn't need to eat, that we listen to the doctor. Why tunva? We're concerned maybe he's shota. Maybe the patient's a little bit not thinking straight. So we saw already before that even if with just one doctor you could force the patient to eat. So why Lamaisa does the Mishnah seem to say that you need two? Lo tzricha di'ika achrina bahadei da'amar lo tzarich. So listen to this, because what's the case? The case over here is where it's not just the patient has his own doctor, right? And what does the patient's own doctor say? The patient's own doctor supports his position that he doesn't need to eat. So you have machlokes harofim, machlokes doctors. So what happens? So one doctor supports the patient's assertion that he doesn't need to eat. And so in order to get the patient to eat, what do you need? You need 2 other doctors, because again, if you only have one other doctor saying that he needs to eat, then it's 1 versus 2. If you have at least 2 doctors on the other side, then Lemaisa again, at least there's a strong, at least it's a 2 versus 2. And in the case of suffix like that, we would tell the patient to eat. So the Gemara says, Lo tzrich dikachrina ba'adei, domer lo tzarach, ma'achilin also api b'kiyim. So we'll say, so now back to what the statement of the Mishnah was. So when the Mishnah said that we go ahead and we feed him on the advice of these experts, pshita, that's obvious. Suffix nefashosu, v'suffix nefashos lahakel. That's obvious because Rabbi say again, in this kind of situation, you have a suffix nefashos, and any suffix nefashos we always resolve leniently. In this case, of course, the leniency will be to allow him to eat. To which the Gemara says, Lo tzricha di'ika trei achrini bahadei the amri lo tzarich. Rabbi say, see, no, you know what the case over here is? The case over here is where the patient has 2 other doctors who say that he does not need to eat. So we'll say, so on one hand, so the non-eating side has 3 people. The patient himself, the 2 doctors, and now what is the Mishnah saying? The Mishnah is saying, but if you bring 2 other doctors that say he does need to eat, we would tell him to eat. So the Gemara says, Va'afal gav damar of safra, trei kamea, even though Rabbi said normally when it comes to laws of eidos, so 2 is the equivalent of 100. Rabbi said, what does that mean? That if a Beis Din is adjudicating a case and the 2 sides bring their witnesses, and one side brings 2 and one side brings 100, from a halachic perspective, there's no difference between 2 witnesses and 100 witnesses. So maybe you'll say, well, who cares if the chola has 2 doctors on his side, making the no eating side 3 people and the eating side 2 people? Who cares? So the Gemara says, no. Hani mili le'inyan edus. First of all, this idea of trei kameya only applies in terms of testimony. Aval le'inyan umdina, but when it comes to matters of assessment, you see what I'll say in this case over here of whether or not a person should eat on Yom Kippur, this is not a din in edus. This is a din in assessing the patient's condition. However, so when it comes to assessments, basar deos as linon, we actually go after numbers. We look at numbers. We look at what is the majority opinion as to how to deal with this particular circumstance. V'hani mili. Furthermore, this is true. Le'inyan umdina d'mamona. But even with assessments, when we go after numbers, that's with financial assessments. Aval hacha safek nefashosu. But here Abba say we are safek nefashosu. Abba say, so therefore what? So therefore, even in a case where what? Where the patient says, I don't need to eat. And he has 2 doctors that support his position that he doesn't need to eat. But yet, there are 3 people on the non-eating side. But there are 2 other doctors who come along and say that no, you need to eat. Halacha l'maisa, who do we listen to? We listen to the 2 who say that you need to eat. Why? Because since it's safek nefashos, since we are dealing with potentially life-threatening situations, again we go with the 2 doctors on the eating side. Okay.
The first 2 said you don't have to eat. Those are the 2 experts. Why do you need 2 more?
No, they're saying the opposite. They're coming along and saying he does need to eat. The Mishnah's case was ma'achilin osa pi bekiyin. We force him to eat by the testimony of 2 expert witnesses. There are 2 more doctors who are coming and say he needs to eat on Yom Kippur.
But the first 2 say he doesn't need to eat. They're the experts.
Everybody's experts. Have you ever met a doctor who's not an expert? I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm sorry. That was wrong. That was wrong.
Why do you have need the 2 more to come and say yes? That's his question.
Because they came. But it's my clocks. Everybody's there. The guy falls down in shul. So 4 doctors show up, right? Four doctors, 7 lawyers. Everybody's there, right? So what happens? So 2 doctors say he doesn't need to eat. 2 more doctors say he does need to eat. So the shaila is, what do you do? So the Mishnah says we feed him, even though the patient's now revived and the patient says I'm okay. So we have 3 on the no eating side, 2 on the eating side. The Mishnah says we feed him.
No, but I'm talking about home.
Right, we're going to do this later. Okay. Well, finish your point, actually.
So, but if you're home and you call 2 doctors and they side with you.
Oh, so we're gonna see halacha l'maisa.
I have to find 2 more doctors.
No. Of course, you don't have to go shopping for additional opinions. These cases are where the opinions are there. Hamidik Tani Seifa. V'im ein sham bikiyin ma'achilin osa piatzmo. But yeah, what we said at the end of the Mishnah, that if there are no bikiyin, if there are no experts there, we feed him based on his own testimony. Meaning, testimony is the wrong word, but based on his own feelings. Mechlal dereisha da'amar tzarich. This seems to indicate that the first case in the Mishnah is where the patient himself did say that I need to eat. To which the Gemara says chisuri mechsar v'hachi katani. In reality, there was a piece missing, and here's how we have to fill it in. But medvar mamurim, when do we say that you need bikim, that you need experts? Da'amar lo tzarich. Rabbi say, you see, when do we say that would you ask for additional opinions? That's when the patient is saying, I don't need to eat. Aval amar tzarich, but if the patient says, I need to eat, so the Gemara says, aval amar tzarich ani, ein sham bikim, I'm sorry, when the patient says, when do we say that you need bikim? So the Gemara says, the amar lo tzarich ani, when he says, I don't need to eat. Aval amar tzarich ani, ein sham bikiyin shrei elachad the amar lo tzarich ma'achilin osa piatzmo. So if the patient ever says that I need to eat, and there are no experts there except for one who says that he does not need to eat, we would go ahead and we would feed him anyway. Or in other words, if the patient says I need to eat, and there's a doctor there that says no, you would be fine throughout the fast even without eating, l'maisa we would go ahead and listen to the patient. Mar baravashi amar. Mar Baravash said the following. Both say this is halacha l'maisa. Kol heichad da'amar tzarich ani. Whenever the patient says I need to eat, afilu ika meya da'amri lo tzarich l'didei shaminan. So Mar Baravash said, now this is coming kind of full circle to the way we started this sugya. Anytime that the patient says, I need to eat, even if there are 100 doctors there who say that he does not need to eat, we listen to the patient. Why? Shene emar lo leiv yodea maras nafsho. Because literally a heart knows its own suffering. In other words, a person knows their disposition and their situation best. Tanan, im ein sham bekiyin ma'achilin osa api atzmo. The halacha is that if there are no bikiyim there, if there are no doctors, so we feed him there based on his own feelings. So the Gemara says, time of the like a bikiyin. Now the reason the Gemara seems to say that we feed him on his own, based on his own testimony, or based on his own admission, is because there are no doctors there. Ha'ika bikiyin lo. But if there were doctors there, perhaps we wouldn't listen to him, but rather we would ask the doctors what we should do. To which the Gemara says, Ha'chikama. This is what it means to say. But medvar mamurim. When is this true? Da'amar lo tzarich ani. When the patient says, I don't need to eat. That's when we listen to the patient. Aval amar tzarich ani. That's when we listen to the bikiyin. That's when we listen to the doctors. Aval amar tzarich ani. But if the patient says, I need to eat, ein sham bikiyin klal. Ein sham, Aval amar tzarich ani. Ein sham bikiyin klal ma'achilin also al pi atzmo. Shene'emar lo leiv yodea maras nafsha. So Rabbi say, what comes out from this sugya is really something quite fascinating. What comes out from this sugya is that halacha l'maisa, whenever the patient says he needs to eat, so halacha l'maisa we give him to eat. Now again, based on our previous sugyas, if we could give him to eat less than the shear, so that's certainly preferable. But if for some reason he says, no, I'm in dire situation, I need to eat more than the shear, then we would give him to eat more than the shear based simply on his own testimony. Even if there are doctors who say, no, he's fine, he'll make it, nothing's going to happen to him, still if he feels leiv the amaras nafsho, we listen to the patient. In the event that lemaisa, the patient says, I don't need to eat, then lemaisa, and the doctor says he does need to eat, in that case, Shulchan Aruch paskins, we listen to the doctor. And one doesn't even need two doctors in order to go ahead and solidify this approach. Even one doctor who makes the claim that the patient needs to eat, we listen to that doctor, feed the patient on Yom Kippur. Because we make an attempt. We make it the same way that we don't just bring out the food to the chol immediately. We try to see if the person could calm down. You always take the initial steps to see if we can get by without it. It's only if he's persistent or the doctor is persistent, then we do it. Says the Mishnah, Misha achsa bulmus. Somebody who became sick with bulmus. Rashi says, bulmus is choli ha'oches machmas ra'avon. So apparently bulmus is a type of disease that came on as a result of extreme hunger. So what would happen? Ein of kehos, one's eyesight would begin to diminish. V'hu masukan lamos. And a person literally, this is a life-threatening situation. He says, "Ukishamar iso chozeres biadush nisrabe." Fine. So we'll see that later on in the Gemara. So misha achza bulmus, somebody who was seized by bulmus on Yom Kippur. Ma'achilin osa afilu dvarim tmeim. We feed him whatever we can, even if there's only non-kosher food available. We feed him the non-kosher food. Ad shia uru einov. Until when? Until his eyesight is restored. Because remember, Rashi pointed out over here that lamaisa, part of what happens with bulmus is your eyesight begins to diminish. Mishanash chol kelev shot. That's simply someone who was bitten by a crazy dog. We'll discuss also what a crazy dog is in the Gemara. Ein ma'achilin also mechatzer kalishah. So apparently, one of the remedies they used to have for a dog bite of a crazy dog is that they would kill the dog and they would feed the patient from the liver lobe of the dog, and apparently that was supposed to heal. That was supposed to heal the bite. So the Tanakama says that we don't do that. Rab Masya ben Charash matter. Masya ben Charash says we can. And I will say, if you look at Rashi, why not? Ein ma'achilin mechatzer kavit va'afapi shenogim harofim b'refuah azu. Eina refuah gimura lahaftir lo isra behemotim al-kach. So also, it's a fundamental machlokes in the Mishnah. See whether or not this was considered to be a real remedy or not. Right? Giving of the dog's liver lobe, was that a real remedy? So Tanakama says, even though people do it, it's not a proven remedy, and as such, you can't go ahead and feed someone from the liver of a dog if it's not a proven remedy. Rabbi Masya ben Charsh on the other hand, Rashi says, kasav refuah gimuru. Rabbi Masya ben Charsh on the other hand apparently holds that no, lemaisa, it is a proven remedy, and therefore you can do it. Va'od Amar Masya ben Charsh. Furthermore, Masya ben Charsh said, "Hachoshesh bigrono." If somebody on both sides is having Choshesh Bigrona literally means throat issues. Now we'll discuss exactly what this means as well, but this also is a type of sakana. Choshesh Bigrono matilin lo sam besoch piv b'Shabbos. He could take medicine on Shabbos. Mipnei shu safek nefashos, because anything to do with the throat, and the Gemara will discuss exactly what the nature of this ailment over here. Anything to do with the throat is safek nefashos. V'chol safek nefashos docha esa Shabbos. Similarly, Misha nafla alav mapoles. Rabbi say, if somebody was trapped under rubble on Shabbos, safek husham, safek enosham. Rabbi say, now let's say there's a pile of rubble and there's a safek if there's a person in there or not. Is there some person in there or not? Safek chai, safek mace. And Rabbi say, even if you ask if there's a person in there, there's a safek if they're alive or a safek if they're dead. Or safek kusi, safek Yisrael. We're not sure if the person is a Jew, not sure if the person is not a Jew. And the Gemara uses kusi over here. It uses kusi in the context of a non-Jew. So what's talach? So you have all these sfekos. So what should you do with this pile on Shabbos? Mefachin alaves hagal. We begin to remove the rubble. Now, the Gemara will discuss why exactly you would think that you wouldn't remove the rubble. We'll get to the Gemara, but now we say Mefachin alaves hagal. We remove the rubble, and how much? I will say this is actually going to be a very important sugya. You're going to see. Actually, we're going to be talking about here one of the most important sugyas in the entire brain versus cardiac death halachic controversy is going to be this Gemara. So we go ahead and we remove the rubble until we get to the person. Now, once you get to the person, Rabbi say, Matzou chai, if you find that he's alive, mefachin, you remove the rest of the rubble to get him out. Matzve'im meis, however, if you find him and he's already dead, yanichu, we leave him there. And what does it mean we leave him there? We leave him there until after Shabbos. Meaning, if he's dead already, there is no heter to continue clearing the rubble. Rather, we leave him there until after Shabbos, and after Shabbos, we'll go and we'll retrieve the body. Says the Gemara. Turn Rabbanan, minayin hayu yodin she'iru einov. How do we know about going back to the bulmos? How do we know that if a person? How do we know that a person was feeling literally? Heiru einov means how do we know that his eyesight was restored? So I'll say obviously I can't believe the Gemara was asking because you could tell if somebody's eyesight was restored. Rather, what the Gemara is asking is how do you know when a person is recovering from bulmos? If a person had bulmos, and how do you know if they're recovering? To which the Gemara says, Mishiyavchin bein tov l'ra, when they're able to distinguish between that which is good and that which is not. Amar Abaye qualifies this and says, ubetaima. Rabbi say, apparently one of the things that you lose with bulmos is your sense of taste. So when a person regains the sense of taste and they're able to distinguish between good food and bad food, that's indicative of the fact that their bulmos is in remission. So the Gemara says the following: Taner Rabbanan, Misha achsal bulmos. If somebody was literally, bless you, was seized by bulmos. If somebody was seized by bulmos, ma'achilin osa kalakal. Bosai says, interesting case. Let's say somebody's seized by bulmos. So again, remember, how do you combat bulmos? How do you combat it? You feed it. You feed it, right? You give a person to eat. But let's say, for argument's sake, all a person has access to is prohibited food items. Prohibited food items. So what's the halacha? So the halacha is we try to give him the least severe food items. So we try to give him the food items that carry with them the least amount of transgression. So when it says, for example, if you have accessible to you tevel unevela, or both say tevel is untithed produce, nevela is a carcass of an animal. If these are the two things you have available to you, ma'achilin also nevela, we give him teeth nevela. Nevela is considered to be more kal, more lenient than tevel. Tevel ushvius, similarly if you have tevel, shvius or also is shmita produce. This would be Shemitah produce after Shasbi, or so the Gemara says Tevelu Shvius. Shvius, you go out and you give him from Shemitah produce. Tevelu Truma. What happens if you only have Tevel and Truma? So Rabbi say Tevel, untithed produce, Truma, produce of the Kohen, and this is assuming that what? That the guy who has Bulmos is not what? Is not a Kohen. Right, he's not a Kohen. So what happens if you have Tevel Truma? What do you give him? Tanahi, the Gemara says that's a machlokes tanoim. Tistanya ma'achilin also Tevel ve'in ma'achilin also Truma. So the Tanakama says we give him teeth Tevel and not Truma. I will say we'll discuss why this is in just a moment. Ben Tema says Truma velo Tevel. Ben Tema says no, we give him teeth Truma and not Tevel. Amar Rabba says Heicha de efshar bechulin ducholi amalo pligi demis kaninon lei umistafinon lei. Rabba says everyone agrees, of course, that if there is chulin available, we would go ahead and give him chulin. We'd fix the chulin and give it to him. So we'll say fundamental machlok is now between the Tanakama and Ben Tema. Tanakama says that when you have a choice between tevel and truma, we give him tevel and not truma. Ben Tema says no, we give him truma and not tevel. What's the root of this machlok? Yes, someone says ki pligi. When do they argue bidalo efshar b'chulin? Now we'll say obviously the machlok is Tanakama and Ben Tema is when there is no chulin available. Mar Savar, one opinion holds, Mar Savar, Tevel Chamor. Tevel Chamor, I will say this is going to be the opinion of Ben Tema. So Ben Tema says, Tevel is Chamor. Umar Savar, Truma Chamura. And the other opinion, i.e. the Tanakama, says, that Truma is Chamor. Why do they each hold their respective positions? Mar Savar, Tevel Chamor. One opinion holds that Tevel is Chamor. About Truma Chazila Kaina. Here's the interesting part. Tevel is not fit for anyone. No one is permitted to eat tevel. Truma, at least, is what? Is fit for the Kohen. Now, I'll say, a non-Kohen is not permitted to eat it. Okay, but Lemaisa, at least, it's in the parsha of consumption. Tevel's not even in the parsha of consumption. Therefore, when faced with a choice what to give the guy with bulmus, give him Truma. Excuse me. Give him Truma. Umar Savar, the other opinion holds, and I both say this is the Tanakama. Mar Savar, Truma Chamura. No, Truma is even more Chamur. Why? Aval Tevel Efshar Litakune. Because I will say here's the difference. See, Truma can never be rendered fit for common use. But what's interesting is what? But Tevel can, even though it's Tevel right now, technically speaking, Tevel can be remedied and made into edible product for the guy with bulmus. Even though I will say you're not doing that now necessarily, the idea is because it can be fixed. Lemaisa, again, it makes it less chaber than Truma. We're going to discuss that. So the Gemara says, Efshar b'chulin. So it's actually mamish next couple of lines. So the Gemara says, Efshar b'chulin pshita. And I will say, remember, in the midst of this machlokes between Ben Tema and the Tanakama about what you should go ahead and give the guy who has bulmus. Should you give him truma? Should you give tevel? Rabba comes along and says, but if you can give him chulin, that's certainly better. So the Gemara says, pshita, what is Rabba coming to add exactly? Obviously, everybody agrees that lemaisa, if you can go ahead and you can give him chulin, you certainly should do that. To which the Gemara says, lo tzricha b'Shabbos. What's the case over here, Abosai? The case over here is where this is occurring on Shabbos. Now, what does that mean? Look at Rashi. Lo tzricha b'Shabbos. Sha'afilu hu Shabbos sha'asr lahafrish truma u'maiser yafrishuha v'lo ya'achiluha tivolim. So both sides, what the Gemara is suggesting over here is that what Rabbah is coming along and saying is the following. So Rabbah comes along after the opinion of Ben Tema and the Tanakama, and Rabbah says like this. Rabbah essentially sides with the Tanakama, who says that you should go ahead and give the guy with bulmus, you should go ahead and you should give him tevel. But Rabbah comes along and says, but what should you do? You should really try to separate out the trumas and maasros before you go ahead and give him tevel. Or in other words, take tevel and untevel it, tithe it, and then give it to him. So the halacha is that's what I was saying. Efshar b'chulin. If you can go ahead and remedy the tevel, certainly do that. To which the Gemara says, Hacham Pshita. So the Gemara says that's obvious. Meaning Rabbi's statement makes a lot of sense. We'll say why. Tiltul midrabananu. We'll say because what's the case? Why can't we separate out Shumos and Maisros on Shabbos? That is not an Isser D'Oraisa. It's an Isser D'Rabanan. So, meaning one can make the very logical argument is, if all you have to give the guy is tevel, and you have to give it to him because he has bomos, and separating out, but you said consumption of tevel is an Isser D'Oraisa. Separation of Shumos and Maisros is an Isser D'Rabanan. So doesn't it make sense to go ahead and separate out the Shumos and Maisros? And yes, violate an Issa D'Rabbanan in order to save the individual from violating an Issa D'Oraisa. Now, granted, Rabosai, he's not really going to violate an Issa D'Oraisa. Why? Because he's in Sakanas Nefashos, because bulmus is a life-threatening situation. So there's not really going to be an Issa D'Oraisa. But still, meaning Rabbah is going to say, if you could remedy a potential Issa D'Oraisa through taking of Trumas, which is only Issa D'Rabbanan, do it.
Which is the Issa D'Oraisa?
A consumption of Tevel. can't eat tevel. So Gemara says, Hachama askinon, what's the case over here? Hachama askinon, ba'atzitz she'ino nakuf. Oh, the case over here, I will say, is what? The case over here is dealing with a non-perforated flower pot. And I will say, what does that mean? That if you can imagine for a moment, the produce over here is not coming from that which is grown in the soil attached to the ground, but rather, again, it's potted produce. Potted produce. Look at Rashi. Rashi says, the teva shalom midirabanan. So the truth is, what's interesting over here is the following. Halacha l'maisa, the only time that produce becomes subject to trumos l'maisos mid'oraisa is if it mamish grows in the ground. If you have a potted plant, it is subject to trumos l'maisos mid'rabanan. So look at Rashi. The tevel shel mid'rabanan. Therefore, again, I will say this untithed produce of stuff that grew in as a potted plant is only tevel mid'rabanan. Ushvus da'afroshas maestros b'shabes d'rabanan. Ashma inan sheyidcha hashvus. V'lo yachiluhu tevel d'rabanan. Da'asu l'mishrei nami tevel d'orais ki'agavna. So we'll say, Rabbah seems to say the following. What's the case over here? The case over here is where we're dealing with a potted plant, and the guy has blumos. You have to feed him tevel. And what does Rabbah say? Separate out trumos and maestros from that tevel. Why? Because since the tevel is d'rabanan, since separating out trumos and maestros is d'rabanan, separate, meaning remedy the produce first before you give it to the guy with bulmos. Because if you don't, what could happen? People might see you going ahead and eating untithed produce, and they might assume that lemaisa, that's permitted. To which the Gemara says the following: Mar savar tevel chomer. So again, it's going back now. Ben Tema said that tevel is more chomer, and therefore again in Ben Tema's model, you should sooner give him truma. Umar savar the Tanakama said truma chamura. So the Gemara said lima tanoihi. See that this is a machlokes tanoim. This sanya. Mi shenoshcho nachash. I will say somebody who was bitten by a snake. So what do? We call for him a doctor. I will say means we call for him a doctor even if the doctor has to travel from far away. Right? So meaning even if the doctor himself, who may be Jewish, was going to go ahead and travel outside of his tchum, we still call for the doctor. Umekarin loes atarnagoles. I will say this literally means we cut open the chicken. Now apparently one of the ways, look at Rashi, korin loes atarnagoles, loses alamaka shezoi refuah. So apparently the way that they would treat a snake bite is they would cut open a chicken, they would place it on top of the bite. Okay, the gozes in loa secretion, and they would go ahead and literally uproot for him leeks, vegetables. Rashi says, "Minam mechuber lahachilo." Apparently, again, these are all the different things. It sounds like they're making a suda over here, right? They have a little chicken, a little salad, right? So the idea over here is these are all parts. This is how they treated the snake bite. And we give him to eat. And I will say, obviously, part of this, actually, the Cretan apparently seems to be in order to keep up his strength. So we do give him something to eat, dafka, these leeks, in order to keep up his strength, and we do not have to tithe the leeks prior to giving it him. Divrei Rebbe. These are the words of Rebbe. These are the words of Rebbe. Rebbe Elazar, Rebbe Shimon Omer, Lo yochal ad sheya aser. Rebbe Elazar, Rebbe Shimon says, no, you should not give him to eat of the leeks until you tithe it. So the Gemara says, Neima, Rebbe Elazar, Rebbe Shimon, velo Rebbe. So apparently, Rebbe say you'd have to say that Rebbe Elazar, Rebbe Shimon accepts the view of Rabbah that when possible, we should in fact take Trumas and Maisos from Tevel before giving it to the patient. And Rebbe does not subscribe to that view. To which the Gemara says, no. Afilu tema Rebbe. No, even Rebbe could agree. Why? Ad kan lo kam Rebbe hasam. Why did Rebbe say you don't have to tithe the leeks? Because remember, a leek is a vegetable, and technically speaking, mid'oraisa, vegetables are not subject to the laws of trumos and maestros. It's only mid'rabanan that vegetables are subject to the laws of trumos and maestros. So Rebbe says, in a case like that, where it's only d'rabanan, let it go. Forget about it. It's not important for now. Let the patient eat the produce, even though it's not tithe. Aval b'maiser dagon the tevel daraisu. But Rabbi would agree that in a case, let's say, where you were giving him of grain, and grain, of course, is subject to laws of tithing midda oraisa. Afilu Rebbe moda. Even Rebbe would agree that lamaisa, again, you would tithe it before giving it to him to eat. Di sharis, Afilu Rebbe moda. Di sharis le ba'atzit she'eno nakov. Asi lemecha ba'atzit shunakar. Here the Gemara uses this expression because if you allow him to go ahead and eat untithed produce from a non-perforated pot, he may come to go ahead and eat untithed produce from a perforated pot. In other words, we'll say what the Gemara is suggesting over here is that the only reason why Rebbe doesn't require you to tithe the leeks prior to giving it to the patient is because lemaisa again, The vegetables themselves are only subject midrabanan, and therefore, again, there's no need to engage in that extra step when dealing with a chola. However, were you to deal with produce that, in fact, is subject to trumos and maasros midaoraisa, you would want to tithe that prior to going ahead and giving it to the patient, lest people become confused and think that these items are not subject to the laws of trumos and maasros. Tanrabanan. Misha achsa bolmus. So we'll say back to the bolmus now. Somebody literally who was seized by bolmus. So what do? Ma'achilin also dvash v'chomine mesika. So we give him honey and any other sweet things. Apparently shadvash v'chomine mesika mi'irin ma'ar einav sha'adam. Because Rabosai, honey and other sweet things help to restore the eyesight of the individual. Remember, we saw before that Rashi said one of the effects of bulmos is diminished eyesight. So apparently sweet things help to restore eyesight in general. V'afa pishen raya l'davar, and even though there's no explicit raya for this, zeichel l'davar. Both says zeichel l'davar means that there's a scriptural allusion, there's a hint to it. What's the hint? Because he quotes over here the pasuk, Ru'una ki aru einai ki ta'amti ma'at dvash hazeh. See that my eyes have been illuminated, have been lit up because I tasted a little bit of this honey. This is actually an interesting case. This is in here. You can see over it's quoted from Shmuel Aleph. This is by Yonasan, who was the son of Shaul. They're out to war against the Plishtim. They're doing battle, and Shaul says, the enemy's on the run. Shaul says, no one eats anything. No one eats anything. We'll eat later. Right now, we need everybody to focus on battle. And Shaul actually said, whoever stops to eat something will be put to death. So amazingly enough, who stops to eat something? His son Yonasan. Not in an act of disobedience. Yonasan wasn't there. He didn't hear his father say this. So what happened? So he asked Yonasan, what are you doing? Yonasan said, I really felt faint. And how did he feel faint? He knew because his eyesight was growing dim. So he said he took a little bit of honey. That's what he found. He found a hive. He took some honey. And he said, now that I went ahead and I took this honey, so what happens? Ru'u ki aru einai. My eyesight has been restored. So the Gemara says, here's an allusion to the idea that sweet things restore eyesight. To which the Gemara says, but one second, umay afa pishen ra'ila davar. Now, what's interesting about the Gemara says, when introducing this pasuk, va'afa pishen ra'ila davar zeichel davar. Even though there's no explicit proof for this, there's an allusion. Now, this is not an allusion. This seems to be a pretty, this is a pretty up in the raya. This is a pretty explicit proof to the fact that sweet things restore eyesight. To which the Gemara says, so what do you mean it's just a zeichel davar? To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. The hasam lav bulmos achzei. Because here's the difference, Rabosai. Yonasan was not seized by bulmos. That wasn't his problem. It wasn't bulmos that was his issue. He was faint. So meaning, the point the Gemara is making is you can't bring a raya from this pasuk that if you have bulmos, honey will help you with your bulmos. All the pasuk says is if you're ill, if you're faint, and your eyesight is being diminished, honey or sweet things will help restore that. Amar Abaye, lo shanu ela la'achar achila. When is this true that sweet things help someone who has bulmos? That's only if you eat honey after already eating other things. Meaning, apparently, in Judaism, we use food to combat all illness, right? So the nice, again, first you go ahead and you eat something regular, and then afterwards you have the sweet things. That's what helps bulmos. Aval kodem achila, but if you eat the sweet things prior to eating something regular, it doesn't work. Why? Because migra gara. Because I will say again, sweet things have a way of intensifying someone's appetite. Dichsiv, because they said the pasuk says, "Vayimtzu ish mitzri basada." I will say this is by David HaMelech. This is after the death. This is after the death of Shaul, and this they don't know what happened to Shaul and his sons. This Ish Mitzri, this Egyptian, they find this Egyptian boy. He comes to report to David about what happened. So the Gemara says, "Vayimtzu Ish Mitzri basada." They found an Egyptian boy in the field. Vayichu also al David. They brought him to David. Vayitnu lo lechem. They gave him bread. Vayochal he ate. Vayashkei. They gave him to drink water. Vayitnu lo plach dveila. They gave him a cake of pressed figs. Ushnei tzimukim, and 2 clusters of grapes. Vayochal, and he ate. Vateshev rucho elav, and his spirit returned to him. Kilo achal lechem v'lo shasayim shlosha yamim. because he had not eaten anything for 3 days and 3 nights. Now, what the Gemara is picking up over here is look at the order of the food, right? First, what's served? First is the bread and the water, and then only afterwards what? The sweet things are only offered afterwards, and even the sweet things are in progression. You have cake of pressed figs, but the sweetest things, of course, in this pasuk are what? Are the raisins, and the clusters of raisins are not given to him until the end. So from here you see that the right way to consume sweet things is how? First, eat your regular meal, your regular food, and then afterwards the sweet items. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. Misha achsa bolmus, ma'achilin osa alya bidvash. Rav Nachman said the name is Shmuel, somebody who was seized by bolmus. The best way to deal with it is to eat alya. Rabose is the tail. Rashi says, it's actually Rashi, this is now Rashi on the left-hand column, first line, alya, basar shamein ma'od. Usually refers to the tail of a goat, which apparently is very fatty meat. Tail meat is very fatty meat. So what do? If somebody gets bulmus, you feed him tail meat with honey. Tail meat with honey. Rav Huna b'rei Rav Yoshua Amar, af solas nekiah b'dvash. Rav Huna, the son of Yoshua, says you can even give him fine flour with honey. The idea is you're not just giving him honey alone, you're giving him honey with something else that sustains. Rav Papa says, "Afilu kimchi desari b'divsha." Even barley flour, which is considered to be exceptionally inferior, even barley flour is given together with honey. Am Rabbi Yochanan, Pam achas achzoni bomos. One time, I was seized by bomos, and what happened? Viratzti lemizracha shaltin. Rabbi says very interesting. So Rabbi Yochanan says one time I was overcome with bomos, and what did I do? I ran over to the eastern side of the fig tree and ate the figs from the tree. The figs are sweet. The kayamti ba'atzmi. Rabbi says, look at Rashi. Why did he go lemizracha shaltin? Rashi says shashemesh makesh sham min haboker ad chatzos. Because Rabbi says the eastern side of the tree has sunlight from the morning until noon. Vashemesh mematek esapri, and amazingly enough, the constant sunlight, or at least the half a day of sunlight, sweetens the fruit. Right, the intensity of the sunlight. So when he had the bulmos, he ran over to the eastern side of the tree. Apparently, the fruit on the eastern side of the tree is sweetest. And he says, what happens if v'kamti ba'atzmi, and I upheld in myself the tenet of v'achachma techaya ba'aleha. I will say that wisdom literally will sustain he who owns it, or will allow the one who owns it, the one who has it, to live. Meaning that Baruch Hashem, I knew this piece of wisdom, that the sun beats down on the eastern side of the tree for half the day, and the fruits on the eastern side of the tree are the sweetest, and I was able to save myself from the bolmos. To Tani Rav Yosef, because Rav Yosef said, "Harotze litom tam teina." If somebody really wants to taste the choicest, right, the choicest of dates, the sweetest of the dates on the tree, yifnet lemizracha. He goes to the eastern side of the tree. Shene emar umimeged tevuos shemesh. Rabbi said literally umimeged tevuos shemesh. Opposite him are the delicacies of the sun's fruits. So the one understands this to be an allusion, a hint to the fruit on the eastern side of the tree. Okay. Rav Yehuda, Rav Yossi, Havu Ka'azli Ba'archa. Rav Yehuda, Rav Yossi will say, we're traveling on the road. And what happened? Achze Bomos l'Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda was seized by Bomos. So what did he do? Kapche l'roa. He grabbed the food of the shepherd. They were traveling with the shepherd. He grabbed the shepherd's rifta, is literally his bread. He grabbed the shepherd's bread and consumed it. Amali Rabbi Yossi. So we'll say, Rabbi Yossi said to Rav Yehuda, what did you do? Kapachta saroa. You just stole the bread of the roa. And Rabbi Yossi, again, in Rabbi Yehuda's defense, Rabbi Yehuda will give him back the bread. But Lamais, again, he was scared about the bulmus. Remember, bulmus could be fatal. So Rabbi Yossi gives him musar for stealing the bread of the shepherd. So what happened? Kimatu lemasa. When they arrived in the city, again, I will say, so Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, achze bomos Rabbi Yossi. Now I will say, now Rabbi Yossi got bomos. What happened? Ahadru bal givitzoy. So I will say, look at Rashi for just a moment. Ahadru bal givitzoy. It's the last wide line on the top left-hand column of Rashi. Ahadru bal givitzagi. Savavu b'nei ha'ir. The townspeople came out. Vikifu leginin shel dvash u'masika u'rakaro shel tavshilin. So I will say, when the townspeople heard that Rabbi Yossi had bulmus, what did they do? They brought out trays of food and honey and cooked dishes and all kinds of things for Rabbi Yossi. Amrali Rabbi Yehuda says Rabbi Yossi, ani kapachti esaroa. I might have taken the shepherd's bread. Ata kapachta es ha'ir kula. You took everyone's food. Now, obviously, Rabbi Yossi is not taking anything. What Rabbi Yehuda was saying is, you've caused them ultimately to bring out all of their things for you. I'm sorry? It's a Bulmus story. It's a Bulmus story. No, first of all, the real point of the story is to show that when one is afflicted with Bulmus, up until now we were saying that it's all about Dvash. Apparently, it's not just about Dvash. When one is afflicted with Bulmus, the most important thing apparently is to eat something immediately. I'm sorry? No, I don't think it's saying that. Rabbi Yossi wasn't afflicted with bulmos until he came. What the Gemara is saying is Rabbi Yehuda had to take the bread from the shepherd, because at that moment, Lamaisek, and when the bulmos sets in, you have to eat something. I'm sorry? That was just the exchange. The Gemara often does this this is the way the story unfolded. So the Gemara is quoting part of the story, and the Gemara quotes the story in its entirety. Vesu, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi, remember, understand something. We when we think about halacha, we think about statements of fact. But remember, again, I will say, one thing we've seen this a number of times, especially in the last couple of weeks, is the way halacha was often gathered through anecdotal episodes, through these kinds of stories. So these stories are exceptionally important. For us, they provide a little bit of relief, right? I'm saying they give us like something interesting in the middle of a sugya, but these stories are very important because it's from these stories. How do you know that Lamais, again, what to do with bulmos? Because you see, Rabbi Yehuda felt that he had to grab the bread mamish right then and there from the shepherd to feed the bulmos. So the Gemara goes weiter. Vesu, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Havikazli ba'archa. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yehuda was another interesting story. We're traveling on the road. What happened? So we'll say again. Remember, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Meir, Havadayik b'shma. Both say Rabbi Meir used to be very careful when he was on the road and had to stay by someone. He was very careful to look at the name of the balabayis. And if somebody had a negative name, Rabbi Meir would not stay by that individual. Rashi says over here, Dayik b'shmo shabalabayis im no'eh im kior. He would look at the name of the balabas. If the balabas had a nice name, or kior literally means a disgusting name. Rabbi Meir felt you could tell a lot about the identity of an individual with their name. So what happened? So Rabbi Meir havadayik b'shma. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi lo havadayik b'shma. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi didn't really pay attention to people's names. What happened? Kimatu lahu dochta. So they came to a particular place. Ba'u ushpiza. So they needed a place to stay. Yavula. Somebody invited them in to stay with them. Amrullah. They said to the balabas, Mashmecha. What is your name? Amrullahu. He said to their name, my name is Kidor. Kidor. Okay. Amr shmamina adam rashuhu. Rabbi Meir said, Kidor, that's your name? You're Rasha. Shene Emar, Kidor ta'puchos hema. Because Rabbi say again, he quotes the pasuk over here. From Devarim, right, from the Tochacha. Kidor ta'puchos hema, because literally you are an upside down generation. So he understood that Kidor is, right, Kidar is Kidar, a reference to a negative generation. So what happens? Kidar tapuchos hema. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi say again. What you're going to see over here, Rabbi Meir didn't say this to the balabas. He didn't say this to Kidar, right? He's saying this to himself. Your name is Kidar. I'm not. It's okay. Thank you for your hospitality. No, thank you. So what happens? Kidar tapuchos hema. Rabbi Yossi. Ashlimu lekisayu. Rabbi Meir lo ashlimu lekis. And Rabbi said again, all of them stayed by Kidar. But here's the difference. Often when you stayed in an inn, you would deposit your money with the innkeeper. I guess maybe the innkeeper had a safe or had something where he put everything. So Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi gave the innkeeper their wallets. And what happened? Rabbi Meir did not give the innkeeper his wallet. Instead, what did he do? Azal osvei bekivrei da'avua. So Rabbi Meir went and he hid his wallet by the grave of Kidor's father. He hid it by the grave of Kidor's father. Okay, what happened? So that night, we'll say this was a Shabbos, we're going to see in just a little bit. This was now Friday night. So Kidor's father appears to him in a dream. And he says, my son, Toshakel kisei demanach arisha duhu gavra. Quick, come and take the money that is resting by the head of that man. That man is a reference to himself, to the dead father. So the dead father is appearing to his son in a dream and saying, quick, come and get the money. Rabbi Meir deposited money over here, come and get the money. Okay, so apparently neither the father nor the son were exceptionally righteous. So what happens? Amar lahu, so the next morning they're sitting down for breakfast. After davening, it's tea room, right? So what happens? They're sitting down for breakfast, and the innkeeper innocently relays this dream to the three rabbanim. Amar lahu, hachi ischazi le bechalmoi. So this is what I saw, and he proceeded to say, my father came to me in a dream and told me, come and retrieve the money from my grave. Amri le. So they said to Kedar, Chama Bei Shimshi Lesbu Mamasha. Rabbosai, Friday night dreams, Shabbos night dreams have no meaning. Have no meaning. So actually Rashi points out over here that it wasn't the rabbis, but instead it was Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was the one who was saying to him, that's meaningless, that's nothing. Rabbi say, of course Rabbi Meir is going to do everything to show him the dream is meaningless. Why? Because his money is there, right? So whatever's going on over here, Rabbi Meir realizes, mamish, this guy just had a dream that my money is at his father's grave, so Rabbi Meir is trying to say, don't pay attention to it, narishkeit. Also Rabbi Meir, so I'll say what happened. Rabbi Meir went to the grave of Kedar's father, and he pretty much stood watch there over his money for the rest of the day. And after Shabbos, after Shabbos, he went ahead and he brought the money back. He brought the money home. So Rabbi say, what happens? Now it's Sunday morning. They're ready to take leave. Amr lahu, they said to Kedar, Havlon kisan, can you give us back our wallets? And what does Kedar say? Amr lahu, lo hayu dvarim me'olam. And what does Kedar say? What wallets? What wallets are you referring to? Amar luhu Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says to Rabbi Yossi, Amai lo daikisu bishma. Why were you not careful? I told you, right? Why were you not careful? The guy's name is Kedar, for crying out loud. Right? What do you expect? Why were you not careful? Amrulei, Amai lo amrat lan mar. So they said to Rabbi Meir, why didn't you warn us? Meaning, I will say, see, remember again, Rabbi Meir never said anything to anyone. Rabbi Meir just said to himself, the guy's name is Kedar tapuchas hema, bad idea. But he never said anything to Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Huda. So now, when they're not getting their money back, Rabbi Meir says, listen, why aren't you guys careful with analyzing the name of the Balabas? So they said to Rabbi Meir, why didn't you warn us? Why did you tell us? So Rabbi says, very interesting. Amr lahu, Eimar da amri ana chashasha. Now, boss, here's what's interesting, because Rabbi Meir said, listen, it wouldn't have been appropriate for me to say something because I don't know necessarily, just because someone has a negative name, it doesn't mean that he's a Vadai Rasha. It just means that there's a chashash. So for me to have told you that Kedar is a no good nick, that wouldn't be right, because I don't know if it's true, right? He says, essentially, my system is not foolproof, right? It's just that often I could tell a lot about people from their names. So for me to tell you that he was a negative guy, that would have been wrong. It's just a chashash. So I'll say, so now obviously Rabbi Huda and Rabbi Yossi are in trouble because they need to get back their wallets. So what do? So they say, Mashchuhu va'ailu lechanusa. So they say to him, you know what, if you don't mind, if you've been so nice and hospitable to us over Shabbos, let's take you out for a drink. Literally, Rabbi say, they took him to the store. The store here means the tavern. They took him to the tavern, let's have a little bit to drink. So I'll say, so they were hoping that if they gave him they plied him with a little bit of alcohol, perhaps they can get back their money. Chazu, Rabbi is very interesting. Chazu, talfachi asfame. They saw that he had lentils in his mustache. I will say what that means is they saw that he had lentils for lunch or some previous meal. So what did they do? Azlu v'yahavu simani lidvisu v'shaklu l'kiseh. So I'll say, what did they do? So they left him in the tavern. They went back to Kedar's wife and they said, listen, Mrs. Kedar, your husband said that you should return to us our wallets. And what's the proof? The proof that he told us this is he told us to tell you that he had lentils for lunch. Right? Because they saw on his mustache. So what happened? She believed them. Va'aisu. They got back their wallets. She gave them back her wallets. When Kedar found out about this, he came home. Azal ihu v'katle le'isasei. He flew into a rage and he killed his wife. So the Gemara says, Hainu disnan. The Gemara says, this is when the Gemara says elsewhere, Mayim rishonim he'echilu basar chazer, Mayim achronim hargu es hanefesh. This is why the Gemara says elsewhere that because an individual was not careful with Mayim rishonim, Mayim rishonim means washing before you eat. Because a person was not careful with Mayim rishonim, he was fed chazer, and because a person was not careful with Mayim achronim, he ended up killing someone. Now, what does this mean? The Rashi points out over here a story that's told elsewhere in the Gemara that look at Rashi. Rashi says, Pundak Yisrael Haya. There was once a Jew who owned a tavern. Hayamocher li Yisrael dvarim hamutarim umaachilim umocher lenachrim basar chazir mavushal. Rabbi says, so what happened? There was a Jew who owned a tavern, and he had two menus. he had the Jewish menu and the non-Jewish menu. To the Jewish people, he fed kosher meat, and to the non-Jewish people, he fed chazer, he fed non-kosher meat. What happened? Rashi says, "Bo Yisrael pundak v'ra'o shlo natal yadav kishehesav lechol v'nasal lefanav basar chazer." So I'll say what happened. There was a Jew who walked into the tavern, and this Jew was not careful with natilas yadayim. Therefore, what? When the innkeeper saw him, the innkeeper assumed, he's not a Yid, he's not Jewish. He's not Jewish, and therefore what did he give him? He gave him chazer. He gave him chazer. Or next Rashi, my machronim harguas hanefesh, zohi ishto shalzu, she'ilu natal my machronim, derech hanot lim yadayim lekanech asfamam biyadayim tovchos, v'lo hayadishn rabos. When you wash my machronim, so the minhag is you wash your hands and you run your hand over your mustache and over the bottom part of your beard to remove any food residue. Kidor obviously was not careful with my machronim, and therefore what? And therefore the mice of the lentils were left in his beard. And because the lentils were there, they were able to deceive his wife, and because his wife was deceived, he flew into a rage and ultimately killed her. So just a very strong Gemara. So because someone wasn't careful with my Mishonim, wasn't careful with washing. Well, it's just an amazing idea that's so interesting how what makes you are the actions you engage in. That Lamaisa, again, the innkeeper didn't think the guy in the first case was Jewish because he didn't wash Natilas Yadayim. What does a Jew do? A Jew washes Natilas Yadayim. And if you don't wash, people assume that you're not Jewish. So Natilas Yadayim, he ended up eating chazer. My machronim, ultimately, again, he flew into this rage and his wife was killed. The Gemara says, Libasof, havu daiki bishma. And I will say from this point and on, from here on in, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi were careful to analyze the names of their hosts. The Gemara says, let's just end with this. The Gemara says, Kimat alahu beisa tishma bala. When they came to a house and the host name was Bala, lo ayli legabe, they would not enter into it. Why? Amru shmamina rashahu. This guy must be a Rasha. Dichsiv va'amru. Here the pasuk says va'amru labala va'amru labala neufim, and they said this pasuk is from Yecheskel to the one who was worn out with adultery. Yecheskel is giving Moshe to the people and saying, you know why you're so tired? You're always so tired. You're so fatigued because you're always engaging in adultery. So they saw the guy's name was Bala, right, which is the same word that Yecheskel used, and they felt, this guy perhaps possesses some attributes of immorality, and therefore Lamaisa would not stay in his home. All right, we'll stop over here for today.